Welcome to the Gravity Well podcast with me, Jenny Yeremy. I host the Gravity Well to celebrate and share the stories of people looking to empower others with the knowledge and skills required to re-establish stability in our communities. My mission is to work through heavy issues in conversation and process in order to lighten the load. I acknowledge that I live on the traditional territories of Treaty 7 and Métis Districts 5 and 6. The treaties and self-governance agreements established by Indigenous peoples were created to honor the laws of the land, maintain balance with nature, and give back to uphold reciprocal relationships. This knowledge and intention are what guide the Gravity Well conversations. I ask for genuine dialogue, real hearts, and openness to different perspectives. This is your invitation to find common ground with me. Positions taken by participants, either individually or collectively, do not necessarily represent those of the Gravity Well. This podcast is dedicated to the natural world, our children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and all future generations. The Gravity Well is on YouTube and streaming wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you see and hear, remember to like and subscribe. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be back in the studio this afternoon. Looking forward to my conversation with Wesam Cooley. Just to remind you, I'm Jenny. I am in Calgary, Alberta, or Markinskis, Canada, and I am a geophysicist turned liability expert, and now a podcast host and public activist. I'm here to create a better story for Alberta, be able to see through the propaganda and bring us together to solve some big issues that we do. We wouldn't be living through these tumultuous times right now without it. So please remember to like and subscribe to the Gravity Well. Doing so helps the voices and views of these important people and issues get out further for the masses. So just a few updates from me on the growing grassroots movements happening in Alberta beyond my guest, who is the founder of Calgary People's Assembly, Wesam Cooley. So the recall campaigns are down to 6. There's Nate Glubish's campaign in Strathcona Sherwood Park. There is Recall Mickey's campaign in Calgary Cross, Recall Jackie in Fort Saskatchewan, Bakerville, Recall Justin Wright in Cypress Medicine Hat, Recall Weeb in Grand Prairie, and saving the best for last is our premier. So if you know anybody who lives in Brooks Medicine Hat, please get them to call this phone number, 587-4488-911. It is truly an emergency situation here in Alberta, so please go to Operation Total Recall to sign those petitions or support those campaigns in their final hours. Thank you to everybody who put yourself out there to do that really difficult but important work. I've recently on the podcast, I've had a fabulous conversation with Mary Stewart of DSMOG regarding our Premier's address from May of 2025 and of last month here. DSMOG is a global news organization focused on cutting through the climate misinformation machine here in Alberta. So just today, I also had a conversation with with Bob Sanford about the global water bankruptcy as well. So please check out that conversation. Keep in mind that I'm also meeting with Charlie Angus on the Midas Canada Network for more of those discussions. You can check that out as well. The Forever Canadian campaign is starting another round. This time they are going to be educating, activating, and ultimately creating voters to address Smith's referendum questions. The Water Not Coal campaign is underway. It's very well organized and a great community spirit around making sure that our water is protected in our headwaters. So please go to waternotcoal.ca to get involved in that. And last thing I want to mention before bringing Wesam in is that we are hoping to have a Alberta Day of Action. So first time in Alberta's history, I think, we are having a Day of Action on May 29th. So please mark your calendar. The goal is to have 1 million Albertans on the street that day. The effort is being led by the Alberta Federation of Labor. So please go to Fight Back Now, Alberta Federation of Labor, to subscribe and find out how to spread the word and organize. It's going to be quite something. So without further ado, let me get Wesam on stage. Hello, Wesam. How are you? Thank you for joining me. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, sorry, I was muted there. Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. And I didn't say yet, but I want to take a moment to say is I'm just so very sorry for the tragedy that is going on in Iran and the broader Middle Eastern region. I think we're going to have quite the discussion here today, talking about all things that are going on in that area. But I just want to say my heart goes out to both them and the community that is in Calgary. I'm sure there are a lot of people that are really feeling the fear and what we are, the unknown that we are all facing at this moment. So I just wanted to lead with that. Thank you. So before we begin, I was saying we've learned a lot since you and I spoke last. So we met last May. It was in the lead up to the election. I was worried about Canada being potentially a 51st state at the time, and we talked a lot about how potentially elections don't matter. And holy man, we've seen a lot happen in the last year to really show what somebody at the helm can do. Now, that being said, this has been something that's been coming on for decades. I'm not ignorant to that, but it's certainly coming to a head at this moment. So the one thing I wanted to frame is, like you and I were saying, we know who our enemy is now. So we have this great name that's been applied pretty broadly, is we're dealing with the Epstein class. We're dealing with the Epstein class in every country, in every state, in every place you can imagine. And so the other thing you brought in for me is we're not so dissimilar with the separatist movement that's happening right now, and the attacks on Venezuela also ring similar to what's happening in Iran as well. So maybe if we can just start there to help frame this issue for people, Wesam, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Jenny. Well, where to begin? Yeah, we spoke last year, and at that time, around then in June of last year, Iran and Israel had a 12-day war, which is actually longer than they've been at war so far, although actually this present war over the last few days, already I think the level of destruction on both sides might exceed what we saw even in those 12 days. And this present war without any indication of when this is going to come to an end as well. Since that time, there was a ceasefire. So that was in Iran. Of course, that all happened within the context of the genocide in Gaza, ongoing still, which continued after that point unabated. That formally, ostensibly had a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza in October of last year, but this has been virtually it's not a ceasefire. Israel has been violating it virtually every day. They've killed over 600 Palestinians in Gaza since the ceasefire began. So that's like what, 3 people a day or something like that. This is not a ceasefire. And that's the situation that continues today in Gaza. All of the worst horrors that we saw during the period of the last 2+ years continue today. Israel still restricting the amount of food and aid that is allowed in. Israel still inhibiting people where they're allowed to go. Is essentially continuing the ethnic cleansing program in Gaza, and not just in Gaza. They're doing this across the occupied Palestinian territories and the West Bank as well. There have been settler rampages against Palestinians, basically, on a nearly daily basis, with the full support of the Israeli army and government. And I should mention also Lebanon has been coming under a lot of fire with, again, there's an ostensible ceasefire between the Lebanese resistance forces and Israel, and yet there continue to be basically daily bombings in the south of Lebanon and daily killings of those resistance leaders. So yeah, that is more or less has been the situation since October of last year. Iran did come back into the picture recently as Donald Trump and Netanyahu have been beating the war drums very loudly. You mentioned Epstein, and there is a sort of, some people put forward the argument that this war on is maybe a distraction from some of the very eye-opening stuff that has been revealed now in those Epstein files. But toppling the Iranian government is something that's been a long-term project of the American empire for a long time. So it's not exactly like they needed any more of an excuse to go after Iran. But that is basically the background here. People will know that for the last several weeks prior to the American-Israeli attack on Iran, there was a massive buildup, like the biggest buildup in modern history of military force in the Middle East by the United States. So there was every indication this was going to happen. And then they went ahead and did it. And here we are. And I guess we'll get into exactly what's happened in just these last 6 days, which is, I mean, a whole, the whole new period on its own. But yeah, that's the background for folks to where we are now.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been reflecting since we discussed having this conversation and where we were last we spoke. And you had spoken a lot about how Yemen had stood with the Palestinian people and had been harmed for it, been attacked for it, etc. And then almost immediately, and actually you did mention in that conversation that Iran had also made some, has always been with the Palestinian people and defending against Gaza's genocide. And then this happened. So it's a sort of say one thing and do another type activity that we finally fully understand from the United States. Obviously, there have been decades leading into this, but now it's just so clear. It's everything they do. So let's be specific. Last June, there were negotiations. They were meant to meet. Was it in Oman at the time as well? And then there were there was an assassination out of that, correct?
Yeah, and they've been meeting, negotiating with Oman. So it's interesting because basically the day before the assassination of the Ayatollah of Iran, Ali Khamenei, the day before, the Omani president came out and said publicly that Iran had agreed to some extremely onerous demands that the Americans were placing on them, basically to give up all enrichment up to a certain level of uranium, to agree to have enriched uranium for their own nuclear energy production housed outside of Iran, agreement to move their uranium outside. Iran has always maintained this position. They are not seeking a nuclear weapon, but they are seeking a civilian nuclear energy program, which is perfectly within their rights as a nation to pursue. And in fact, I mean, should Iran obtain a nuclear? Well, look, the Ayatollah, now assassinated, Khamenei, he actually made a fatwa many years ago saying nuclear weapons are forbidden. That this is actually against Islam. Iran should not obtain nuclear weapons. That was a decision he made. Yeah. And Iran has not been pursuing a nuclear weapon program. This is not just from Iran's mouth. This is from the mouths of experts. It's well known. And yet the United States has insisted that they are, and is insisting on all kinds of loopholes they have to jump through for their nuclear program. And this coming, mind you, from two nations, Israel and the United States, both of which have nuclear weapons, both of which have attacked dozens of countries around the world. I mean, Israel has gone to war on almost every one of its neighbors, almost every nation in the region. The United States as well has gone to war not only on nations in the Middle East, but all over the world, and especially today under Trump. So the United States armed with over 5 nuclear warheads. Israel has, we don't know for sure because they don't admit to having them, right? But estimates are around 90. So they're there dictating to the Iranians, you're not allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, all of their weapons are pointed at Iran. It's ludicrous. And the absurdity of it is something that, you can only really miss it if you're getting all of your information about the situation from the Western mainstream media, who are basically stenographers for power. They just parrot exactly what the United States government and other Western governments want you to hear. You're not going to get the full story from them. The fact of the matter is, Iran had, the day before Israel and the US attacked it, had agreed to an incredibly onerous, nothing that they should have actually been forced to agree to in the first place, and yet they did. And then comes the assassination of Khamenei, the same guy who made the fatwa against nuclear weapons. So what do you, I mean, what's left now? What's left? Yeah, Iran is hitting back now. Yeah.
Well, and so thank you for bringing up the media. So I've had the opportunity of being in the chat group that we have in WhatsApp. And so I've been exposed to some different media sources. So I think it's important to name those for my audience. So I listen to Danny Haifong now. I pay attention to his podcast. I watch Dialogue Now, which is Nima. What's his last name?
Dialogue Works. Nima El Khorshid, I think, something like. He's Iranian. Really
He's
good.
Iranian.
Has great
Yeah.
guests on. Yeah.
Yes. And Glenn Deason is another one that I follow. He's in Europe. And between them, they have former CIA operatives. They have former Justice Department or like Department of Defense people. They have geopolitical analysts from all over the world speaking to these issues. And then obviously they have, is it Mohammed
Mohamed Morandi, yeah.
Yes, of course he's been. And so one of the things I wanted to bring into this was the lead up. Like you said, Iran was very clear in the lead up to this. So I want to back up a little bit and talk about what happened in January, because so the dollar crashed in Iran and people took to the streets for good reason. There's actually, I will add from my water conversation, there's also a water shortage in Iran. So it's a very real concern of the people. But it's been very clear by Bassett that this was caused by the United States. Since June of last year, they have been choking the dollar. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not just since last year. The United States has maintained sanctions against Iran for many years now, which we've seen in Venezuela and in Cuba. The sanctions debate has come up. It's incredibly destructive from a country like the United States, which, as much as the U.S. empire is in decline, still maintains an enormous amount of economic control over the world. The U.S. dollar is critically important. So it has an enormous impact on a nation when the United States says, you are sanctioned. Any country that does business with you, we're going to impose punishments on them. That has an enormous impact, even on a big nation like Iran. So you got to put that in context. And there were economic issues. Of course, there are economic issues in Iran. There are criticisms, genuine, fair criticisms from the people about how that's been handled. There's been a lot of criticism about the sort of neoliberal path that some of the policies in Iran have taken over recent years. You got to understand Iran is not some like cartoon villain place. It's just like any other nation. It's just like Canada. Yeah, you have different people in government, different politicians, different interests, and they pursue different policies over the course of different years, right? So there are people within the Iranian government who have pursued more liberal, neoliberal policies, and there are those who have, critiqued it from within the society, and that is all just the sort of normal internal political situation. And there was certainly some genuine impulse behind these protests that happened in January. However, it has to be said that many of those protests, and including especially the most, shall we say, the violent ones, really, because there were some very violent protests in January, were essentially stoked by Western agents in Iran, and especially Mossad agents operating on behalf of Israel. So Israel, I mean, this is not me saying this, by the way. Mike Pompeo.
No, Mike Pompeo.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a quote here. The Iran regime is in trouble, I'm just going to get this properly. Bringing in mercenaries in the last best hope, riots in dozens of cities, and the Blasij under siege, Mash, Tehran. Anyway, 47 years of this regime, POTUS 47, coincidence, and then Happy New Year. Also, he said Happy New Year to every Iranian on the streets and also every Mossad agent walking beside them. And then he CC'd Donald Trump, Rubio, and the CIA director. So it's very clear that maybe not all the violence, but most of the violence was carried out by the CIA and Mossad.
Yeah. That's him saying it. That's Mike Pompeo. Yeah, who is like an actual established figure within U.S. politics, former head of the CIA. Okay, he's saying those Mossad agents on the ground helping these protests. And what were they doing? Right? If you followed, Dr. Morandi and others reporting from Iran about what's actually happening there, right? They were saying, well, some of these protests were going around actually inflicting on people. There were people walking around with weapons, people that were several like dozens of police officers, Iranian police officers, were killed in these protests, right, or riots, as you know, I believe Pompeo referred to them, right? So these are actually like, you know, there was a genuine element, and then there's the foreign backed like violence that is put in there specifically to trigger a government crackdown. It's done specifically to trigger a crackdown and create chaos in the country so that the foreign media can then turn around and say, oh, look at the brutality of this government crackdown. Well, the government said several thousand people were killed. They didn't say that they were killed by the government, by the way. The Iranian government said several thousand people have been killed in this violence, so that presumably includes both the victims of the rioters and the people killed in return in the government crackdown, right? Some of whom will have been those very same agents, right? So, yeah, and then from that, you had the Western media and some really shameful stuff being repeated from very dodgy, shadowy groups based in the West, claiming, for example, that 35,000, I've seen this number, 35,000 people were killed in Iran in those few days of protests. Now, to put that in perspective, okay, to put that in context, after 2+ years of genocide in Gaza, where Israel has been leveling entire cities, carpet bombing entire neighborhoods, blowing up hospitals, blowing up schools, blowing up refugee camps and refugee shelters. 2+ years of that, and the official number is about 70,000. Even that is likely a very small underestimate, but that's the official number, 70,000 in conditions of absolute unrestrained mass murder by just bombing the hell out of an entire area. And they're claiming in the course of a few days, the Iranian government killed, I've seen 35,000. This is the number that seems to be being passed around now. At the time, during those days, there were people coming out saying there might be 80,000 killed. There was one interview on Piers Morgan's show. You know, I mean, he has some good people on occasionally, and then he finds just the worst scum of the planet Earth to go in debate with them. One person who's like a pro-monarchist Iranian, you know, against the government, because, you know, we'll talk about these people. There's quite a few of them in Calgary too. Okay, you know, she was on there saying, she was in a debate with it was Glenn Greenwald and Anna Kasparian, and she said the Iranian government in these few days of protests might have killed more people than have been killed in Gaza. More people, perhaps, possibly been killed in a few days of protests, and the government crackdown than have been killed in Gaza. And you should see Glenn Greenwald. He looked like he was going to be sick hearing what was coming out. I mean, okay, this is manufacturing consent for what came next.
Yes, 100%. And that's like, there's no evidence of this. Like the official count is something like 3,500 people, somewhere in there. Nowhere near the number that you're suggesting.
Mm-hmm. And that, again, that number is not killed by the government. That number is what the government says was killed altogether.
Yeah. And I do want to add, just because I have it here, the Channel 14 news in Israel also gloated about having Mossad agents down there walking beside the Iranian protesters on the street. So this is the
a lot more than walking.
Yeah, exactly. And this is I mean, like we said, this has been going on for so long, but at least we're at a place where we can see it. And despite, like you said, the amount of propaganda that is thrown at us, I do want to elaborate a bit on the fake negotiations. I know you've belabored this point a lot, but I do want to add Rubio. I just was looking at a video he put out the day before saying, basically, yeah, we've had conversations. It's going well, but I can tell you right now, unless they're going to somehow get rid of all of their weapons, they're going to find out, you know, like he didn't say it, but he said it, you know, that it's coming. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the state of the way that this has been carried out. So let's talk about the events of last Saturday and what's happened since. So I'll just open with, as you said, this tragedy of this school, this all-girls school being hit by the U.S.-Israel machine, whereas Iran has been very strategic in its response. So maybe can you elaborate about what we're seeing in the early days of this conflict?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was very clear to the Iranians what was coming. I think everyone knew. They know, when you see a buildup like that, right? And I think the Iranians, look, they have no intention of putting their weapons down and surrendering completely in the face of this just barbarism. So they knew this was coming. They're prepared, by the way. They have a very, very intricate plan of defense, which is now being enacted, and the Americans and the Israelis are clearly not equipped to handle what now Iran is bringing down on them. But to start out, yeah, so that day, the first day, last Saturday, they assassinated Ali Khamenei, the Ayatollah, which is like, is an extremely important figure in not just Iran, but across the Shia Muslim world, which is an enormous proportion of the Muslim world. It's basically like assassinating the Pope, put it that way, right? You can imagine what the reaction of the people.
That's exactly what my spouse said. Yes, this is the equivalent of assassinating the Pope. So it reaches many countries, and it's awoken a number of countries. Sorry, keep going.
No, no, absolutely. And he was a very beloved figure in Iran, among most of the population, and especially now. I mean, obviously there's critics, as there are in every government, in every country, but in the final days, he also knew that this was coming. Several weeks ago, I remember seeing a story that he went to visit the grave of Ayatollah Khomeini, one of his predecessors, who, it was basically seen that, like, a lot of people said, like, him visiting this grave is his kind of way of saying, I'm coming to see you soon, because he knew that something was coming. He was offered the opportunity to hide away in a bunker, or I even heard that Russia extended an offer to harbor him in Russia. And his response was, unless all 90 million Iranians can come with me, I'm not going. Okay. And then they killed him anyway, right?
Yeah. And meanwhile, Netanyahu is in Germany. Is that right?
I mean, who knows? I've heard conflicting things. Apparently, some say he flew to Germany. Others are saying I don't know. I don't care where this.
He's not in Israel though. But yeah, and what's fascinating about this is they made a martyr. Like they almost, like I said, they've rallied people around this martyr, making him a martyr. Sorry, I'm not saying that well.
No, absolutely, yeah. And martyrdom is like actually a pretty central concept within Shia Islam as well. So, and now you've got basically a nation of people who are ready themselves to be martyred if necessary to stop this evil that's come down on their nation. So great job, America and Israel. Like whatever it is you think you're accomplishing militarily. I mean, Donald Trump made this ridiculous statement like, oh, we've killed Khamenei now it's for the Iranian people to rise up. This is the only opportunity you'll have for generations. This is your chance. These people are delusional. They have no sense of the country that they're trying to invade. They have no sense of it. Okay, they have no idea. There's tens of millions of people that have been coming out, by the way, after those January riots. There were mass demonstrations in support of the government, in rejection mostly of these Western-backed riots. Tens of millions of people. And they still continue to come out today, even as the city they're in might be being bombed by the Israelis and Americans. They're still coming out. So, that's what the Americans are up against.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's absolute. I heard somebody say it today in one of the podcasts I was listening to. It requires a level of racism to not appreciate the type of spirit there is in the people of Iran, like to not acknowledge that this would embolden people to rally behind their government. Like Professor Morandi was saying that, like you said, people are on the street, in fact, saying, take me, like this is, martyrism is so strong that people are saying, if this is what it takes, we're ready. Because, and, I have to say, I feel a sense of this here. It feels like we're in a place where we can't, sitting back and doing nothing is not going to help. Like, let's go back to these negotiations. I don't see there being any way that Iran could have negotiated their way out of this situation. It was very clear that there was no win. They, like you said, they were telling them they couldn't enrich for nuclear facilities, like even power. What other country in the world is held to that? And then also, that wasn't good enough. Like you said, they had agreed to it despite that, and it still wasn't good enough. So to me, we're reaching a place where there's no way to negotiate with the Americans and the Israelis, whether you do or you don't. And so Iran has, like you said, this strategy that they've been doing. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So they've been hitting the military bases across the Gulf states. And can you help me and also the audience understand a little bit about how these Gulf states are actually arranged? Because what I've heard in the last week here is these are almost like family-run states. And this is, in fact, helping the rest of us. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop there. If you can explain it a little better.
Yeah, so the West, with its deep concern for democracy in the Middle East, all of its best friends are the worst dictatorships and monarchies, right? You've got the Saudis, right? All of this talk about women's rights in Iran, and yet you're allied to the Saudis, who until a few years ago didn't even let women drive on their own. Like, okay, great of your feminist values there in the West. There's Saudi Arabia, there's the UAE, there's Kuwait, there's Bahrain. These are all dictatorships. Who have put down uprisings from within their own countries. I mean, Bahrain is a really good example. Bahrain is actually majority Shia, but it is controlled by a Sunni dictatorship, which crushes the rebellion of the people. During the Arab Spring, there was a big uprising in Bahrain, brutally crushed. Didn't hear a word from the West in complaining about this, because the West isn't interested in democracy. And the truth is, they don't care about Iran having a nuclear weapon. They know Iran isn't pursuing a nuclear weapon. All of this is what they're really opposed to is any nation in the Middle East, and to be honest, any nation on earth that asserts its independence and its sovereignty against the Western Empire. That's what the United States is against. And especially in the Middle East, Israel is super against it, because for them, they recognize that is an obstacle to their ambitions to essentially conquer all of Palestine and beyond. And I say and beyond very deliberately, because you may have seen there was a very telling interview with Mike Huckabee, the present United States ambassador to Israel. He was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson. And Mike Huckabee was saying, oh, yeah, well, I believe that God gave the land of Israel to the Jews because it's in the Bible. And Tucker, asked him, well, wait a minute. In the Bible, it says the land of Israel is from the Nile to the Euphrates, which today would include a lot of land inside Iraq and Egypt, Jordan, Syria. So what are you talking about here? And Huckabee's response was, it would be okay if they took it all. And actually, this is not just the Americans saying this. Netanyahu has spoken about this. Even the head of the opposition in Israel is now talking about the Greater Israel Project. So, I mean, this is a settler colonial project that has been planted in our by the West. Okay, it's these barbaric settler crusaders from Europe that have always been a problem for the Middle East for hundreds of years. And now they have a little settler colony inside Palestine, which just looks around and says, we're going to take all of this. And unfortunately for them, they find that the people who live there won't allow this. They resist, just like the Palestinians have resisted. And they mete out all kinds of cruelties on them, right? We saw in the genocide, just literally mass slaughter. And it's not just in Palestine. And why is Iran in the crosshairs now? It's not, Iran is not on the borders of Israel. It's quite far away. But, Iran is one of the main, in fact, it's the only real power in the region that is actually providing consistent support to these resistance operations. Iran is one of the main supports for the resistance of the Palestinian people in Palestine. They're one of the main backers of the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah. They're the main backer of Ansarullah in Yemen. They back a lot of resistance groups across the region.
Across the world even, right? Like even in South America, they've offered, I don't know what that looks like, but that they've stood with Venezuela and other nations that have been facing this. Yeah.
I don't think they send any military support to South America, but statements of just opposition to this, just enslavement of all of humanity to the Western Empire. That's what they oppose, and that's why they get targeted.
Yeah, and I want to add, because it's in my head, Mike Huckabee has also been promoting the basically the doctrine of Israel, which is to like the end of days type, with the military. Like apparently they've been getting text messages first thing in the morning saying, "Get ready to be a part of the second coming," and most of
Yeah.
them are not even secular. Like, so this is a bizarre place that we are in, that is just so openly dominant, this colonial system, like you said, just being exposed by on the daily. But what I find fascinating about what happened here, and I've heard, I think it was Professor Morandi argue that they would have been better off not um, martyring the leader there, because, or the basically the equivalent of the Pope, because they've now emboldened places like Bahrain, who are the people are, um, witnessing this U.S. backing not actually being backing anymore. So, I mean, I've heard speculation that this could potentially remove the United States footprint in the Gulf state region. Do you see that? Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's already seeing it being done. Yeah, the killing of Khamenei has given, Iran held back for a long time. It exercised what a doctrine that it called strategic patience. There's all the crap that the Israelis and Americans kept doing to them, just kept doing to them. Last June, remember, that started with an unprovoked attack on Iran directly, right? And they have just held back, and now they're not holding back anymore. This is it. And this is actually the view, not just in Iran, but this is the view also emerging across the resistance, across the region, that this is it. This is the fight now. They've been building up their strength. They've been, watching the enemy, seeing what they're going to do. And now this is it. This is the time to remove Western imperialism from the Middle East. And by that, they mean US bases across the region and Israel. I would not be surprised if Israel does not survive this war. Already, Israel is being pummeled. And, about I'll mention Iran's strategy here, because people need to understand that we are 6 days in. We are 6 days in right now to a war that could potentially go on for months or even years. And we are right now only in the first to second phase of Iran's military strategy here. So some folks might have been watching online, seeing many videos of Iranian missiles landing in American bases in the region and landing in Israel. So, and you'll see that, Israel and the United States, their main, the main thing that they've held out as like their strength is their ability to prevent missile attacks on them. Anti-air defenses. Israel has its vaunted Iron Dome, which is like the thing. Yeah, the Iron Dome. It's like Israel's greatest, it's talked about as if it's like this incredible military achievement, just makes Israel invincible. If you move to Israel, you're safe from all of these savage Muslims around because we have the Iron Dome, which will protect you. Well, we already saw that fall apart during the 12-day war, when Israel couldn't protect anything from being hit by Israel. I mean, Iran was pounding Israel so hard that the far right, the most insane members of the Israeli government, were begging for a ceasefire. I remember seeing Itamar Ben-Gvir, that, absolute just madman of a, Zionist, just fanatic, going around in Israel, and people were yelling at him, "How could you let this happen?" And he was like, "We didn't know they were going to hit us this hard." Okay, they have, this is the thing about racists. This is the one advantage you'll always have over racists, is that they genuinely believe in their own superiority, their own God-given superiority. They genuinely think they're invincible, and they will always underestimate you. And that's what they've done with Iran. They've underestimated Iran, because those missiles that you're seeing falling on American bases and inside Israel, they're not being hit by Israeli. Some of them might be, but mostly they're getting past. And Israel is launching several missiles. This is the Iron Dome. They launch missiles to hit these things, and mostly they're getting through. But here's the kicker. What we've seen these last 6 days aren't even Iran's most advanced missiles. These are Iran's old stock. Yeah,
Yeah.
these are like previous generations. Iran is holding on to its most advanced stuff. And when I say advanced, I mean they've been working with the Russians and the Chinese. They have some stuff that no one has, that have not been deployed in contemporary warfare. Okay.
That's right.
They have things that have never been used before. And they are holding on to these because they are exhausting the stock of interceptors from the Americans and the Israelis. The Americans and the Israelis, they have all this high-tech stuff, which costs a lot and takes a long time to produce, and that stock is being depleted. The Americans are already saying, we're running out. We're running out of defenses here. We're running out of interceptors. So Iran is holding on to stuff, and over the next few days and few weeks, just watch what has happened already is nothing compared to what Iran is about to bring down on the American bases and on Israel. And along with hitting the American bases, they're also hitting radar systems, they're hitting anti-air defenses. So they have a very sophisticated plan, and they're enacting it stage by stage. And they're taking this, they're doing it meticulously. And they're also working with not just, Russia and China haven't gotten directly involved, but they're providing intel. They're providing intel and perhaps other kinds of support. The Iranians are being a bit cagey about it.
3D radar, I've heard. So the distance, like China has provided Iran this sophisticated radar system that can see 1,000 kilometers offshore or something like that. So just bananas capability to be able to see the enemy. But yeah, I just want to highlight, I noticed on CNN the other day, they've been asked not to show the missiles being coming in from Iran anymore, because I saw in the early days or two there, they would send these, even this is so sophisticated, and yet it's not what we know to be still in their arsenal, but these systems that would go, and it's like 4 different whatever projectiles, and so the defense system is going after those projectiles, and then the big one actually goes through and hits the target. So it's pretty wild, considering that is not even new tech for them. This is just old tech. And fascinating enough that because, like you said, of the sanctions that have been applied to Iran for decades, this is all built by Iran and generated locally. So, and it's repeatable and it's cheaper because they don't have the capability to do the big expensive stuff. So I was hearing today, the US government can make 330, they can hit 330 targets. Now this is on an offensive, not a defensive system. And that's it. They've got basically the capacity for 660, but they need 2 missiles per target. And that's it. So we're talking about witnessing the US be exhausted of resources while Iran has a back door to Russia to resupply themselves. I also heard today that we should talk about the implications of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz a bit, if you don't mind, and the impacts of the global oil and gas trade. I was reading today, 60% of India's crude goes through that region, 40% of China's. It's Pakistan that's impacted by this. It's Korea that's impacted by this. It's Europe and gas impacted by this because Qatar is now shut in. It's Australia, all of their liquids, so petrol and airplane jet fuel. So all of these things have been choked off, but what comes with that is the return would normally be food supply. So this is a massive disruption to the global trade system. So can you please help others understand a little bit about what's going on in that regard? Thank you.
Yeah, so an enormous amount of that fuel shipping and gas shipping goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is right off of Iran's coast. Iran is able to, at will, just shut it down and basically tell any ship that goes through, we will attack your ship if you come through here without our permission. And they can be selective about who they allow in. So I've heard that they are allowing Chinese ships and maybe Russian ships as well, right? So it is, it's going to have a differential impact on different parts of the world. Unfortunately, here in Canada, we have repeatedly decided to align ourselves with Western imperialism. Carney's statement on this was just absolutely outrageous, saying that he supports the strikes, but then he's like walked back with regret or whatever. And it's just ridiculous. gas and oil. Um, not sure if it's going to work for them. It might alleviate some of the issues, but to be honest, I mean, the impact this is going to have globally is enormous. And you've got to put that for Europe, especially. You compound that with like already the way that they have sort of incapacitated themselves in relation to Russia, cutting off all of their the gas that they were buying from Russia. And now they're going to have even more problems compounding on top of that. I mean, what's this going to mean? What's this going to mean for the Ukraine front, right? Like, is there going to be anything left there? Europe is, I mean, the West as a whole is now facing its terminal collapse as an empire. And like you said, Iran does have land routes backdoor, not just to Russia, but to China, the real powerhouse economically. And, this is how Iran has been able to survive these sanctions and whatnot, is that they don't actually need any access to Western markets. They don't need access to the US dollar, really. The world is shifting. The world is being turned on its head by the rise of China, which has, in a sense, enabled this, this ability of Iran to say, actually, we can go toe to toe with the Americans now. I mean, unheard of in our lifetimes to this point. A country that can confront the United States militarily and hold its own, totally unheard of. And yet we see Iran actually, by all indications, having the upper hand. And expect that they will keep that Strait of Hormuz closed as long as they have to. They killed the Pope of Shia Islam. Okay, they killed Ayatollah Khamenei. What are they? The Iranians are going to stop at nothing. They're going to stop at nothing until the Americans and the Israelis have been completely dismantled in the region. And they have all the cards now. Expect some bad times economically during this war.
Well, I wanted to expand a little bit on what you were saying about resources. Like, we're now having Ukraine support this effort in Iran. And so the other piece I was hearing, which I think is really meaningful, is you look at this flow. So India is now being cut off, and they've been sort of okay with the genocide that's been going on in that region. And so this is making them decide. The other thing that's really interesting to me is Taiwan. Like, they're talking about taking resources away from Taiwan. Taiwan's never really seen China as a threat in all of this time, and now their supposed backer is walking away from them. So what does that do for their relationship? And what does it do for Korea that's watching that and saying, why am I a part of this? So like you said, this is shifting everywhere. It's not just shifting the local region. I do have a couple questions from the audience here. I wanted to expand, and you did say it, but I have to admit I'm not sure, the audio went out a little bit when you were speaking about our Prime Minister, but I'll just try and get you to say a little bit more here. So the question is, can you talk about why Canada's PM is denouncing the potential nuclear weapons of Iran, but saying nothing about Israel and US's nuclear arsenal? The US is the only country who has used nuclear weapons. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, why does the Canadian Prime Minister do any of the stuff he does in supporting? I mean, they have been openly supporting Israel throughout this genocide, this like basically Holocaust taking place in Gaza, throughout, without ever really wavering from it. They have backed Israel. They continue to supply weapons to Israel. There's a bill coming up in Parliament next week called the No More Loopholes Bill. Call your MP, although, good luck if you're talking to one of the MPs in Calgary. Okay, I mean, they're all worse than the other, right? But I mean, because Canadian-made weapons have been going through the United States to Israel after, there was a bill that supposedly banned all Canadian weapons going directly, but there's now some that go through the US, and the bill is aiming at closing those loopholes. But, these are things that the movements of the people have forced the government to concede. As far as the upper echelons of the government are concerned, listen, whether or not certain individuals are in the Epstein files, you have to understand that our ruling class are an elite cult of racist imperialists, all in it together. I mean, McCartney was not, before he was Prime Minister of Canada, he used to be the Chancellor of the Bank of England. And while in that role, he was the person responsible. He was Chancellor when the UK decided to steal a bunch of Venezuelan gold. You may remember Bank of England to hold this gold for us, and then they decided, actually, we're gonna take this gold and we're not gonna let Venezuela have it because we don't recognize the legitimacy of the Venezuelan government, and just stole about 1.2 billion pounds worth of gold from the people of Venezuela. And Mark Carney was chancellor of that Bank of England. So I mean, these people are a bunch of corrupt mafia elites. Okay, some of them, a lot of them, are actually like pedophile sex traffickers. But whether or not they are that, they are part of this elite cult that genuinely see the rest of the world as their playground, see a country like Iran as a barbaric nation that can never, we have no role in supporting, nothing redeemable. No matter how much Iran does, they are always the enemy because they stand up to this Western empire of which people like Carney are a part, an integral part, and they have no intention of challenging this. So yeah, I have very little faith. You want to talk about regime change? Okay, all this talk of regime change in Iran. Let me tell you, the place where regime change has to happen is right here and in our neighbors to the south and Europe and all that. Yeah, it's the West that needs regime change, and they've never been in a weaker position. So,
Yeah, it's coming at us. And this is where I think, the resistance movement is becoming a place of optimism. I know that's not fun to say right now in the face of what's being experienced on the ground there. It's horrifying to think of what's coming from this, because a lot of people are going to suffer from a lack of access to food and a lack of the system moving around. Even the US itself, not only is, I need to say this part, the Strait of Hormuz, they argue that it's only 20% of the movement of oil and gas, but it's also the cheapest 20%. So this is going to hugely impact the markets, our ability to actually afford to do anything in terms of development projects. All of this stuff is going to impact us in a negative way, despite the fact that the people who stand to benefit most, a lot of them are operating right here in this province in oil and gas. So it's a pretty fascinating time. And like you said, the whole idea of us being able to overcome our own suppression is really what we're witnessing, what's happening down in Minnesota. I'm going to be really specific. Something like this separatist movement that's happening in Alberta, I think and you brought this into the light of this conversation. Can you talk a little bit about how you see it being related to Venezuela and the broader global shift that we're seeing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you got to look at American empire as a global sort of strategic system. You're going to think like an imperialist for a second, and what if the U.S. empire is really going to be kicked out of the Middle East? Then what is left to the U.S. empire? Because you got to remember, these elites, this capitalist system, it functions on exploitation and constant expansion of exploitation. It needs to constantly grow. So you need to be constantly taking from someone. And for a long time, they've sustained themselves by taking from the rest of the world, taking from Africa, taking from the Middle East, taking from places in Asia and Latin America. And now much of that is no longer really going to be accessible to them in the same way, right? So what then is the solution for them? They're going to have to double down in the places they still have access to. Now, you may have heard Donald Trump, some commentators have talked about this, and there was a security document that was released that put forward basically American imperial strategy thinking, although they wouldn't put it in those terms. Trump is very much focused on the Americas. He is, this term, the Don Roe Doctrine, has kind of been passed around. So you may know the Monroe Doctrine from like the 1800s, when the U.S. was in imperial competition against the empires of Europe, and they basically said, you stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Everything in the Americas belongs to the United States. This is our backyard. This is the place where the United States can exploit. And as the US became global, it became less and less of a thing. Well, now the Don Roe Doctrine is like Donald Trump's basically his return to that. If he's not able to hold Iran, and if Israel is lost, and the US isn't really able to have a foothold anywhere else, and they're not interested in helping Europe anymore because Europe is just, on their own, then the United States is going to have to say, well, we have here in the Americas. And what have you got in the Americas? You've got a bunch of places in Latin America. that you might just be able to topple with sheer force. So they go into Venezuela, kidnap the president, and say, yeah, you make a deal with us that suits our needs, and if you don't, we'll just kidnap you too and put someone else, and we'll keep doing it until we find someone who's just willing to bow down to. And so, the current president of Venezuela has no choice. They're cracking down on Cuba. You'll see they just went into Ecuador. There was a recent military operation just yesterday in Ecuador, and Ecuador dutifully came out afterwards and told the Cubans, get your diplomatic embassy out of Ecuador. So they've now cut Ecuador, which used to have a leftist government not too many years ago, has now cut diplomatic ties with Cuba. Okay, so that's what's happening in Latin America. But guess what? The Americas are not just what's to the south of the United States, it's also what's to the north. Okay, so what have we got here, right? So you look at Minneapolis. This is Trump preparing the forces of suppression in the United States for what he plans to do to the American working class. If you can't take it from the working classes of Africa and Asia and Latin America, well, they can from Latin America, but if you can't take it from the Middle East anymore, then you got to crack down on the working conditions of the American people. That is the only way that the capitalist elite bloodsuckers of the United States be able to continue what they do. And as you crack down on the people in the United States, they're going to try and rise up, and you're going to have a real strong response. Yeah, you got to really put them in line. And that's what shooting down two people in broad daylight on video does. When no repercussions, no accountability, the president can just lie about what's on video and get no repercussions. Yeah, they are preparing the people. They are preparing the forces of repression. And Canada is a target. Alberta is the first part, but Canada is a target. You've got an enormous country. You've got tons of natural resources. You've got a population which, frankly, has been getting a bit of an easy ride, right? We have public health care, or what's left of it, right? We've got, public services. We've got, we've got things that Americans don't have. And as long as we have that, that's another area where the capitalist class of the Americas can crack down. And the United States is looking at us and saying, those Canadians have been free lunch for a while. We haven't been doing to them what we've been doing to the rest of the world. Well, why not? Look at all that oil in Alberta, especially. Why should they have it and not us? If we're struggling, if we can't hold Iran, we can't hold the oil fields of Iraq and Syria anymore, well, there's this oil field in Alberta. And guess what? Unlike the Iraqis and unlike the Syrians, the Albertans do not have a tradition of armed resistance. The Albertans do not have countries like Iran nearby that are going to support our resistance. We are here for the taking. And it's the longest undefended border in the world. So what's coming for us? What's coming for us? I know there's no support for this in Alberta. The numbers that you poll people, the support for regime change in Alberta, the support for separatism, as they call it, in Alberta is basically zero. But guess what? In Venezuela, I shouldn't say zero. It's what, 16% or something? Okay. Nothing.
Yeah, the core support, but it's dropped. You're bringing up a really good point. It's dropped since 2019, which is fabulous. Keep going. Yeah,
that's great. But guess what? You know how much support there was in Venezuela for the kidnapping of Maduro? Zero. You know how much support there is in Iran for the killing of Khamenei? Zero. They don't need public support. See, this is where the racism and white supremacy comes in. We think we're different. We think Canada is different, that it could never happen here. It can happen here. They don't need anyone to agree with them. They just need to have the biggest stick. And ICE has now 5 offices across Canada. They have one here in Calgary. And I believe, this is my theory, that the reason ICE is in Calgary is to train the Calgary police, to prepare the Calgary police for a day when Calgary might look like Minneapolis because people here are sick of, and decide to rise up against what appears to be an inevitable drive to tear Alberta out of Canada and into the United States. And when that happens, the Calgary police will have to do what ICE is doing across the states. Yeah. And I think that's why they're here, perhaps among other reasons. So we got to wake up here.
Well, and I think, I just want to, because this has been very heavy and I want to make sure that people understand, like a really good example is, I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names. The leader, the Pope-like figure in Iran, what's his name again?
Khamenei.
Okay, so when they assassinated him, it did the opposite of what they intended. When they murdered those 2 people in Minnesota, it did the opposite of what they expected. And I think that's the piece that we have to hold on to, is that we do have the power, provided that we stay together and not let the supremacy thinking overwhelm us. Be diligent about finding the information that is out there available to us, have these conversations, and be vocal. Be like Minnesota. I can't think of anywhere more similar in the world than Alberta to Minnesota. This is this is what we got to embrace, is the fact that they don't really see us for the capacity that we have when we come together, and we really can overcome them. I'll be specific. I doubled their footprint in Minnesota and it did nothing. People came out even in bigger numbers. Same thing with what you said, in these few days, the US has dropped more stuff in Iran than they did in those 12 days prior, and it's done nothing. So I think it's just really helpful for people to understand that even though it doesn't feel that way, we are coming to a real opportunity here across the world to push back against our oppressors in a big way. So I will include in this the 3 actions that are available to people. So there's the one that you spoke about, which is the daily phone pledge. So call your MP, even if they don't care. I actually got a hold of somebody in my office. I'm going to follow up again tomorrow, asking for that yes. So we're looking for a yes from members on Bill C-2233. That's the No More Loopholes bill. We're asking the Canadian government to withdraw Canadian troops from the region. I'll include that one. And then also tell Carney to oppose illegal attacks on Iran. So we're reminding folks, before we part, we have to say that this is an illegal war. It is unconstitutional as well. It didn't even go through Congress. In fact, I heard from, is it Hensington? One of the people that is a geopolitical reporter, I can't think of his name right now, but he was saying that Israel's Congress knew about these attacks, but the American Congress didn't. So this is quite something, that we're in a place where not even Congress is privy to this. And we are seeing cracks in the mainstream media to that end. So I think there is a real opportunity here to not let them be successful with whatever nefarious actions they're planning to use ICE for in these midterm elections, for example. The fact that that the tariffs were even overturned is another way to know that even though this is a person who has obtained ultimate power, the system is holding up in a way to push back against it. So I think if we just rely on the rule of law and we rely on each other, can I offer you a moment to have some closing words before we wrap, Wesam?
Sure. Yeah, I'll add one action point, which is this coming Sunday. We have the next in our bi-weekly protests for Gaza, which have been continuing for now basically since the beginning of the genocide. It's going to be at City Hall at 3 p.m. And given recent events, we're also going to be talking about, hands off Iran, hands off Lebanon, hands off the Middle East. And yeah, I really want to encourage people. There is reason for optimism and there is reason for pessimism. As Marxists might say, pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. And there have been a lot of periods of setback in the Middle East and the resistance there, and also periods of really great advances and successes. So I want to encourage people in Alberta, people who are in the anti-separatism movement, don't let white supremacy or the notion of Western exceptionalism blind you to the allies that you have here. There is a vibrant Gaza movement that has been pushing forward and has been in battles with the police, has been fighting for our right to protest. Because you got to remember, they've cracked down on us. I'm still facing criminal and civil charges. I'm actually in ongoing lawsuits against the Calgary police, mostly on the defense for organizing protests. We are fighting those fights, and we haven't gotten as much support from typical Calgarians as we would hope, right? And we can't see Palestine as a separate issue. And I just want to put one thing for your audience here is that you may remember at the University of Calgary encampment, there were a number of students got together, set up a little patch of grass at the university, protesting the university using their tuition for investments that support the genocide in Gaza. And less than 24 hours later, the police came in with batons and tear gas and basically beat the snot out of a bunch of people and put people in hospital and cracked down on that thing. There was an enormous follow-up to that of people like Well, we eventually got a Freedom of Information request, this was also reported on in progressive media at the time, that showed that the safety minister in Daniel Smith's government, Mike Ellis, spoke directly to police chief Mark Neufeld about an ASER investigation that was called for, and Neufeld told him it would be best if this happens very quickly, and he responded to Neufeld, yeah, they won't really investigate. Extremely dodgy stuff in there. To the point where this, if it had gotten the attention and support that it should have gotten, could have become a scandal that might have actually gone all the way up to the premier. We still don't know exactly what the discussions were. This is the kind of scandal, it seems to have taken out the police chief, because you'll remember Mark Neufeld resigned last year. This is the kind of scandal and we actually spoke to the police commission. The police commission read out a very nice prepared statement, entirely focused on why this is not the premier and the province's responsibility. They didn't do anything wrong. Okay? This kind of a scandal, if it had gotten proper support and attention from all of the progressives of the city, might have been enough to deal a real blow to this provincial government, to Daniel Smith. It's still out there. Yeah, and I'm more than happy to talk with anyone who wants to talk about it, about how we can help push that scandal forward and maybe deal a real blow to Daniel Smith. We have a common enemy here, and you have some allies that you are not utilizing. So, don't forget about us.
Let's talk about this then, Wesam, because more than this, we always have to come back to where we are and what's happening in our communities and how we come together for each other. So absolutely, let's have a conversation about that. And anything else you want to talk about with me, my door is always open to you. I'm super grateful. I'm going to try and make it on Sunday too. Thank you, Deborah, for weighing in. So Deborah is she's actually a former vet. She's a veteran as well, and very, very much opposed to this. Really appreciate your time. We covered a lot. We had a lot to catch up on. I know there's more. So let's just keep it going. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.